Hi guys, so I've left this a little bit late in the day, but I wanted to do a little tribute review for the brilliant Gene Hackman, who sadly passed away just a few weeks ago. Hackman wasn't a horror guy, obviously, but he was still a wonderful actor, probably one of the best of his generation. I consider him to be right up there on a pedestal with people like Clint Eastwood and Charles Bronson. You know, he's part of that whole brigade of classic actors, the type of which you just don't really see anymore, totally irreplaceable. I grew up watching a whole slew of Gene Hackman films, things like Superman, The Poseidon Adventure, Unforgiven, and later on I discovered such films as The French Connection. But I wanted to cover one of his lesser known films today, just to be a little bit different. I did consider doing Uncommon Valor, which is a brilliantly underrated war film from the early 80s, and me and my dad were quite partial to Bat 21 as well, which was a Vietnam movie that came out in the late 80s. We also saw Crimson Tide at the cinema in the mid 90s, not that I appreciated it at the time, but ultimately I've decided to do Narrow Margin because I just think it's a little bit closer to the sort of content I normally do, plus this is a very good movie anyway. So to give you an idea of the plot, Hackman is playing a mathematician, and one day he comes across this piece of paper that has this weird narrow margin going down the side of the piece of paper. I've done a mock-up of the prop from the movie, and Hackman becomes absolutely transfixed with this narrow margin. He just keeps staring at it, and we watch him staring at it for 90 full minutes. It sounds really boring, but Hackman pulls a rabbit out of the hat with this film. He just makes something out of nothing with this script. You can see this guy's psyche slowly dissolving as he considers the metaphysical and religious connotations of this narrow margin. It's a fascinating movie. No, I'm totally kidding. This movie is not about a scrap of paper. What this film is actually about is a woman who witnesses a murder in a hotel room, and she's got to get herself to the nearest city in order to guarantee herself police protection, because there are going to be mobsters who will want to kill her so that she can't be a witness who could potentially put away the head of a certain crime family. The trouble is, this woman, who's played by Anne Archer, she lives in Canada, which is a very sprawling country, and the nearest city to her is Vancouver, and it's going to take her a couple of days riding on a train going through the Rockies to get to Vancouver. So there's a lot of time for the bad guys to get her. Now, she's got Gene Hackman with her for this ride. He's a district attorney charged with protecting her, but a couple of enforcers managed to get onto the train, and they are going to try and take out Anne Archer, potentially Gene Hackman as well, if he gets in their way. So this is going to be a very dicey game that's played on this train between these two pairs of duos. This film is sort of like a thinking man's version of Under Siege 2 Dark Territory, which was another film that I saw from around about this time. It's got similar scenery as well. This film also reminds me of the train section from Russia with Love. So in that particular Bond film, there's a segment towards the end that lasts about 20-25 minutes where Bond is on a train and there's all this spycraft going on. There are private train compartments and people who aren't who they say they are, and so on. Narrow Margin is like an extended version of that train sequence from Russia with Love, which is great because I love all of From Russia with Love, and especially the train sequence. This film was directed by Paul Hyams, or is it Peter Hyams? It's definitely somebody Hyams. Now, this guy had a very prolific career. I would say the 1990s was the peak of it. So after he did Narrow Margin, he basically got into bed with Jean-Claude Van Damme, not literally. So he did Sudden Death with him and Time Cop, and he would go on to do one of the Universal Soldier sequels as well. It's crazy how many Universal Soldier films there are now. I've only ever seen the classic first one, but apparently there are now 6 in total. It's absolutely bonkers. Peter Hyams is not a household name when it comes to directing. Personally, I'd never heard of him until I started researching this review. So I was worried that this film wouldn't really stand the test of time. I thought it might feel a little bit tame by today's standards, but if anything, my opinion of it just shot up even higher after rewatching it the other night. This film feels so refreshing watching it in today's era, especially. I think if it got made today, it would look totally different. There'd be like CGI stunts and cars flying over the top of the train. The whole train would have to blow up at the end of the film somehow. They'd have to do something like what you see at the end of Mission Impossible 7. But I like this old school style filmmaking when it comes to thrillers. It's really cool, actually. I don't think Gene Hackman would have got cast in this if it was made today, and if he'd been the same age, because he's in his mid 60s when he's playing this role, and they just don't cast actors that old anymore. They'd probably rather have somebody like half that age. I don't even think Anne Archer would have been selected for this movie these days. I mean, she's about 40 in this. Too old by today's standards. They'd probably go for somebody about 30. There were even a couple of things in this movie that I'd completely had forgotten were in the mix. So most of the stuff I remembered was on the train, but there are a couple of really cool things in the first act that had totally escaped my memory. So firstly, J.T. Walsh is in this movie, another brilliant actor whose career and life was tragically cut short when he was in his 50s, but he was so good back in the day, usually playing supporting roles, but just brilliant to watch this guy. And I was actually surprised that he took on a role that was as small as what he's got in this film, because he's the guy who's murdered basically at the start of the film. But what scenes he does get are really good. I could have happily watched this entire film again, but with J.T. Walsh playing the main character who Hackman is playing. I could have watched two different versions with these two actors. That would have been absolutely fine by me. I would have invested time in that. And the other thing that I'd forgotten from the first part of the movie is the cool car chase that goes from Anne Archer's cabin in the woods down to the train. So you've got some proper old school car stunt work going on. Gene Hackman's driving this car, weaving his way through all these tall Canadian spruce trees or whatever they are, and there's a helicopter firing bullets down, and the car almost goes off a ravine at one point, and it's really exciting stuff. The true meat and potatoes of this film, though, is the action on the train, and for the most part, it's brilliant. What I really like about this is that Gene Hackman's character, the name of him is not going to come to me. Let's just continue to call him Gene Hackman. I'm quite happy to make believe that Gene Hackman himself is the hero of this whole affair. But it's very rare in this that he has to use his fists or a gun to solve any problems. From the minute that Hackman and Archer are in big trouble, Hackman is constantly having to rely on his wits to get them out of any situation. You can tell the cogs are constantly going off in his head about how he's going to respond to this and that. He's having to think very carefully about the couple's next move at every single turn. He's having to think about his opponent's counter move. So it's almost like a game of chess on a train, and it's very absorbing. Anytime that one potential dangerous situation is dealt with, and it seems like the opponents are coming up with something else, and next thing the train is stopping at a platform and there are more dangers there, and there are people on the train who are acting sus. There might be hidden villains on the train, maybe, or potentially hidden allies. There's a lot going on in this, and throughout it all, Hackman's character is he's mostly very serious because obviously he's trying to protect this woman's life, but there's a bit of humour in him as well. A couple of really funny parts in this film which come along just at the right time, I would suggest, and Hackman, who played a variety of roles throughout his career, is absolutely in his element here as a district attorney who's getting him and Archer through this film on his brain power alone for the most part, but it's very impressive. I don't think Anne Archer has quite as much to do. She was a capable enough actress back in her heyday. She was also Jack Ryan's wife for a couple of movies. But in this, she's mostly just sat around in the train compartment as Hackman goes off and does his hero bit, but she's a decent enough foil. Even the villains in this film are pretty good. There's no, like, extra formidable foe, somebody who has been completely overwritten and is extra tough. There's nobody like that. There's nobody like a little bit comic book, shall we say. These feel like real gangsters, and they are actually highly competent. They seem quite smart. Even the one on the train who is presented as a little bit of an oaf doesn't actually act like it. He doesn't make any daft decisions during the film. The villains they're not sat around just twiddling their thumbs on the train and constantly looking the wrong way or going down the wrong corridor. They always seem to basically be where Gene Hackman and Archer are. And you can tell that they are really using their wits to try and flush out the witness. They are really putting a lot of thought into this film, just as Gene Hackman is on his side of the bargain. So it's a real intellectual tussle, this movie. My favourite of the two villains, definitely the one with lots of facial hair and the really cool white suit, which I would love to own personally. But this guy is very good. He only really gets one long dialogue scene, but he really makes it count. The actor who's playing him, I can't remember his full name. It's somebody Sickers. He's got a weird second name, but he actually died last year. I just randomly stumbled across that fact when I was looking at members of the cast on Wiki. So I guess you could call this review a little bit of a tribute to him as well as Gene Hackman. I don't think I've seen this particular actor in anything else before, but he's very good as a villain in this. In terms of negatives, I've only really got one. So I spotted this one review online which said that there's quite a few coincidences and contrivances in this film, although I noticed that the author didn't actually list any. But personally, I only spotted one that got me thinking. So very early on in the film, when Hackman and Archer are driving through the woods trying to make their getaway from the helicopter, they come out into this clearing and they see the train for the first time in the movie, and it's just about to pull into the local station. And I thought to myself that this was very convenient that this would happen just when they need it to. This is a very remote part of Canada. I can't imagine that trains are coming through this station like every 20 minutes, like it's London Euston or something. I just don't buy it for a second. Probably there's only like 2 or 3 trains a day coming through a station like this. So it did seem like a train just conveniently arrived because Gene Hackman wished it so. And I did roll my eyes a little bit at that, but it's only a slight thing. Like, for most of the rest of this movie, I think it's been very well thought out, very, very well written. This is a very neatly packaged movie. It's not too long. You get just the right amount of adventure with this, and I would absolutely encourage you to check this film out, even if you're mainly here for the horror content. I think a lot of the feelings that you'll usually hope to get from watching a horror film, you'll get from this. You'll feel on the edge of your seat. You'll have a little bit of a chill as you're worried for the characters as they're on this train adventure. It's quite a dark film. They're trapped, in the Rockies on a train. There's no one who's going to help them. And it was a real pleasure rediscovering this. There are so many gems in the Gene Hackman library, and this is definitely one of them. Now, I don't own a copy of this movie, although I would be more than happy to if the opportunity arose. No, I rented this on Amazon Prime. In the UK anyway, you can either rent the standard edition version for £3.50, or you can buy the HD version for £5. I chose the standard edition, but the quality of the picture was really good on the one that I was watching. So, shall we get to the bag of terror and see what sort of score I'm going to give this? I think we should. So let's see what we've got in here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4.5 Michael Myers carving knives out of 5. I don't know if you noticed, but I accidentally called them the bloody axes in the previous review that I did. But yeah, it's going to take me a while to get used to calling them the Michael Myers carving knives. But this is the best score we've had with the knives so far. This is a thoroughly recommended movie. 4.5. Now, I'm not going to do a reading update today because I've not read another novel since my last update. I did want to briefly mention a couple of things, though, before I go. So firstly, I'm using a brand new microphone today. I'd be very interested to know if you noticed that or whether you're only noticing now that I've mentioned it. But certainly, I think I listened back to some of the clips that I recorded for this particular review, and I think they sound much better than some of the videos I've been putting out over the last 2 or 3 months. I had all sorts of trouble with my previous microphone, and that sort of prevented me from recording a lot of the time. But I think this new microphone sounds really good personally. So I'm hoping that this is the start of a good run for the channel. I'm looking to get some real momentum back and going back to posting regularly again. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and I keep forgetting to mention this, I've been forgetting to mention this for like 6 months, but I'm actually on Blue Sky. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm on Blue Sky. I'm called The Midnight Woodsman, and I make the occasional tweet about movies and books and stuff. So by all means, follow me on there if you want to. But other than that, I think we'll wrap it up for today. This was my review of Narrow Margin. I'll catch you all again next time. Bye-bye.